The crystal chandelier cast dancing shadows across the ballroom as Emma adjusted her pearl necklace for the 100th time that evening. 10 years. A decade of this elaborate charade, and still her fingers trembled when she had to play the role of the loving wife. Across the room, Daniel raised his champagne glass, his politician's smile perfectly calibrated for the cameras that would capture this moment for tomorrow's society pages. "To my beautiful wife," he declared, his voice carrying that practiced warmth that had fooled everyone except the woman standing beside him. 10 wonderful years. Emma's lips curved upward in response, a movement so rehearsed it felt like muscle memory. The applause rippled through the crowd, senators, business magnates, socialites, all witnesses to what they believed was a fairy tale marriage. If only they could see past the designer gowns and orchestrated intimacy to the hollow space where love should have lived. The Ashworth and Montgomery families had engineered this union like a corporate merger. Emma's father, a media mogul, and Daniel's mother, a political dynasty matriarch, had seen the strategic advantage, combined influence, shared resources, a legacy built on power rather than passion. At 22 and 24 respectively, Emma and Daniel had been sacrificial offerings on the altar of ambition. Emma remembered the night before their wedding, sitting in her childhood bedroom, staring at the dress that hung like a beautiful prison. She had dreamed of painting in Paris, of losing herself in colors and textures that spoke truths her words could never capture. Daniel, meanwhile, had accepted his fate with the resigned determination of a soldier reporting for duty. Politics was his calling, and a strategic marriage was simply another campaign to be won. Now, watching their guests toast to a love that existed only in carefully staged photographs, Emma felt the familiar weight of suffocation. Daniel's hand found hers, warm and steady, but it might as well have been a shackle. They had perfected this dance. The tender glances, the synchronized laughter, the way he would guide her across a room with his hand on the small of her back. To the outside world, they were the golden couple, proof that arranged marriages could bloom into genuine affection. But Emma knew the truth. They were strangers who shared a bed, a house, and a child, but not a single dream. "Mommy, why do you look sad?" 7-year-old Michael's voice cut through her reverie. Their son stood beside her, his dark eyes, so like Daniel's, filled with the perceptive innocence that often caught adults off guard. "I'm not sad, sweetheart," Emma whispered, kneeling to his level. But Michael's frown deepened, and Emma realized with a chill that their son was beginning to see through their performance too. The argument began, as most of their conflicts did, with something seemingly trivial. Emma had declined to attend another political fundraiser, citing exhaustion, but Daniel knew the real reason. She despised these events, the endless small talk about policies she didn't care about, the way she had to shrink herself into the acceptable shape of a politician's wife. "You can't keep doing this," Daniel said, loosening his tie as they stood in their bedroom after yet another social obligation where Emma had attended but remained emotionally absent. "Senator Williams asked me tonight if you were feeling well. People are starting to notice." "Notice what?" Emma's voice was sharp, ears of suppressed frustration bleeding through. "That I'm not performing adequately? That I'm failing to be the perfect political accessory?" "That's not what I meant, and you know it." Daniel's calm was fraying at the edges. "We have responsibilities, Emma. To our families, to Michael, to everyone except ourselves." She yanked off her earrings, the pearls clattering against the marble vanity. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we had been brave enough to say no? If we had chosen our own paths instead of letting them choose for us?" Daniel's reflection in the mirror looked older than his 34 years. "We've built a good life. Michael is happy, our families are proud, and we've accomplished things together that we never could have managed alone." "Accomplished?" Emma repeated bitterly. "Is that what you call this? This beautiful, suffocating life where we're both slowly disappearing?" The words hung between them like smoke from a fire that had been smoldering for years. Daniel wanted to argue, to defend the choices they had made. But standing there in their bedroom, their separate sides of the bed so clearly demarcated it might as well have been a continental divide, he couldn't find the energy for another lie. The breaking point came 3 weeks later during a family gathering at the Montgomery estate. Emma's frustration had been building like steam in a pressure cooker, and when Daniel's mother made another comment about Emma's artistic hobbies being a charming distraction from her real duties, something inside her snapped. "They're not hobbies," Emma said quietly, but her voice carried across the dinner table like a blade. "My painting isn't a charming distraction. It's the only thing that keeps me sane in this." She gestured vaguely at the opulent dining room, the family portraits watching from their gilded frames, the careful arrangement of our lives. "In this beautiful lie we're all pretending to believe." The silence that followed was deafening. Daniel's political instincts kicked in immediately, but for once, Emma didn't give him the chance to smooth things over. She stood up, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor, and walked out. That night, they fought properly for the first time in their marriage. Not the careful, controlled disagreements they usually had, but a raw, ugly confrontation where years of buried resentment finally erupted. "You're destroying everything we've built," Daniel said, his composure finally cracking. "My career, our son's stability, our family's reputations." "What about what this is doing to us?" Emma shot back. "What about Michael growing up thinking that marriage is supposed to feel like a business arrangement? What about the fact that we're teaching him that love is performance and happiness is optional as long as you maintain appearances?" As if summoned by her words, Michael appeared in the doorway, his small face streaked with tears. "Why are you fighting? Do you really love each other?" The question hit them both like a physical blow. In the sudden silence, Emma and Daniel stared at their son, seeing their own doubts reflected in his eyes. How long had he been watching them? How much had he absorbed of their careful pretense? Emma knelt down and pulled Michael into her arms, but she couldn't bring herself to give him the reassurance he was seeking. The lie stuck in her throat like a stone. 3 days later, Michael was injured in a playground accident when Emma and Daniel were in the middle of another tense discussion about their marriage. The call from the school nurse sent them both racing to the hospital, where they sat in the waiting room, their son's blood still staining Emma's blouse, and finally confronted the truth they had been avoiding. "We're destroying him," Emma whispered, watching through the observation window as Michael slept peacefully, his arm in a small cast. Daniel's political mask had completely fallen away, leaving only a father's fear and guilt. What are we supposed to do? Walk away from everything? Destroy our family's alliance? Throw away 10 years of building something together? What if what we built isn't worth saving? The question came out softer than Emma had intended, but she saw it land like a truth Daniel had been avoiding. The conversation about divorce happened quietly, over coffee in their kitchen, on a Tuesday morning after Michael had left for school. They had both been thinking about it for weeks, but neither had been brave enough to voice it first. When Emma finally said the word divorce out loud, Daniel felt an unexpected sense of relief wash over him. "I don't want to hurt him," Daniel said, referring to their son, "or our families, but I can't pretend anymore that this is working." "What if we could do it differently?" Emma asked, her hands wrapped around her coffee mug like it could anchor her. "What if we could separate without destroying each other? What if we could actually be friends?" It was a radical idea in their world, where divorce was often a blood sport played out in tabloids and courtrooms. But as they talked through the logistics, shared custody, separate homes, honest conversations with their families, Emma felt something she hadn't experienced in years: hope. The dissolution of their marriage took months to navigate, but they did it with the same careful attention they had once applied to maintaining their facade. They went to counseling together, not to save their marriage, but to learn how to end it gracefully. They practiced explaining the situation to Michael until they could do it without breaking down. They met with lawyers who specialized in amicable separations. The hardest part was facing their families. Daniel's mother wept as though someone had died. Emma's father raged about wasted opportunities and damaged reputations. But for the first time in their adult lives, Emma and Daniel stood united, not as husband and wife, but as two people who had finally found the courage to choose authenticity over convenience. "We tried," Emma told her parents. "We really did, but we're not the same people we were when we were 22 and 24. We've grown in different directions, and that's not anyone's fault." Michael took the news better than they had expected. Children, Emma realized, were often more resilient and perceptive than adults gave them credit for. "Will you stop fighting now?" he asked, and Emma felt her heart break a little at the hope in his voice. "Yes," Daniel promised. "We'll still be your parents, and we'll still love you more than anything in the world, but Mommy and I are going to be happier living in different houses." The actual divorce was finalized on a crisp autumn day, almost exactly 11 months after their 10th anniversary party. Emma signed the papers in her lawyer's office and felt a lightness she hadn't experienced since she was young. That afternoon, she drove to an art supply store and bought canvases, paints, and brushes, materials for the life she was finally brave enough to live. Daniel threw himself into his political work with renewed energy, but also with a different perspective. He began advocating for policies that supported working families, drawing on his own experiences of the pressures that could tear people apart. His authenticity, his willingness to speak honestly about his own struggles, made him a more compelling leader than he had ever been as the perfect husband with the perfect marriage. 2 years later, Emma had her first gallery showing. Daniel came to the opening, bringing Michael and his new partner, Sarah, a brilliant policy analyst who shared his passion for public service. Emma was there with James, an art professor who understood her need to disappear into her work for hours at a time. They stood together, the 4 adults who were now Michael's family, looking at Emma's paintings. One piece, titled "Breaking Free," showed a bird emerging from a beautiful but constraining cage, its wings spread wide against a sky full of possibility. "It's beautiful," Sarah said, and she could hear the sincerity in her voice. "Thank you," Emma replied, and meant it. Michael tugged on Daniel's sleeve. "Dad, are you happy now?" Daniel looked around at this unconventional family they had created, his ex-wife, who had become one of his closest friends, his son, who was thriving with 2 homes full of love instead of 1 home full of performance, his partner, who saw and accepted all of him, not just the public persona. "Yes," he said, and for the first time in his adult life, it was completely true. "I'm very happy." Later that evening, after the gallery had emptied and Michael had fallen asleep between Emma and Daniel during their weekly movie night, a tradition they had maintained even after the divorce, Emma reflected on the journey that had brought them here. They had lost a marriage, but they had found themselves. They had disappointed their family's expectations, but they had exceeded their own hopes for what co-parenting could look like. The gilded cage was gone, but what they had built in its place was infinitely more precious. A family held together not by obligation, but by genuine care for each other's happiness and well-being. It wasn't the fairy tale anyone had planned, but it was real, and it was theirs, and it was beautiful in its imperfect authenticity. Emma smiled as she watched Daniel carry their son sleeping to the car. Tomorrow, Michael would wake up in Daniel's house, and the next day, he would come home to her. It wasn't traditional, but it was working. They were all working finally, as the people they were meant to be, rather than the people they had been expected to become. Sometimes Emma thought, the greatest act of love is knowing when to let go.